When we turn our eyes toward the movies, our pulses quicken, the shadows on the landscape grow sharper, the background music swells. By these and other traditional signs, we are made aware that we are approaching the spot where the treasure lies buried. We have entered the region where, once, the sacred mushroom of personality grew as tall as the sequoias. The movies have been through many phases. In the beginning, quite naturally, audiences felt only amazement that such an invention existed. It was not until Mr. Cecil B. DeMille arrived in California that people stopped merely staring at the pictures and started looking through the screen aperture into a world of dreams. Even then, it was the story that mattered most. However basic it was, because it was being told in an unfamiliar medium, it was difficult to follow and demanded total attention. I myself did not begin going to the pictures for about 10 years after this phase began. By then, in the early 20s, stars such as Miss Pauline Frederick were already claiming more public notice than the narrative. Mr. D.W. Griffith wished to prevent this shift of emphasis. The way Miss Lillian Gish, with her unconquerable tact, tells it, this seems like a miscalculated public relations job. As I see it, like a true stylist, the creator was doing everything in his power to avoid being eclipsed by his cast. He failed. His public was simply not sophisticated enough to take in the idea of a director's film. The concept was not popularized for another 20 years. Then the fair name of Mr. Alfred Hitchcock began to be printed in the credits of his films as large as those of his leading players. In Mr. Griffith's time, people were absolutely unaware of the technical devices that he was inventing at the rate of almost one per day. Even the word film, which is basically a more technical term than the word picture, was hardly ever used. The camera was the audience's eye, and with it, all they wished to do was to gorge themselves upon every aspect of the divine being. I came from a middle-class family living in Sutton, which is a suburb 12 miles outside London in Surrey, and because I went to my first movies with my mother, it was to some extent with her limited vision that I saw them. I don't remember my father ever going inside a cinema. I was in a secret trance while each episode of The Phantom Rider lasted, but afterward I pretended to think it ludicrous. One of the great jokes at home was to clasp one's hands and roll one's eyes as actors did on the screen. In my mother's view, the pictures were all right for children and the lower classes, but they were trivial, and worse, they were American. For people of refinement, there was only the theater. I was at least 17 before I was often with people who talked without condescension about the movies. My professor of literature said, "If you want to understand Shakespeare, go to the cinema." Even so, I and most of the rest of his students interpreted him to mean that we were to go to culture films, German, rather than entertainment ones, American. Thus it was that more than a decade of movie mania passed me by. I am amazed at this, for it is impossible to exaggerate the influence that the cinema had on urban life during the last phase of the silent movies and the beginning of the era of talkies. Apparently, from the industry's own point of view, the peak years were in 1946 and 1947. But even if more seats were sold during those years, people occupied them less wholly. By then, Londoners had all played at least bit parts in their very own Technicolor widescreen production, The War, although many complained that it was less moving than the silent version released 20 years earlier. They now went to the pictures merely to relax. During the late 20s and early 30s, they had gone to worship. That was when so many cathedral-sized cinemas loomed up in Edgware Road that they seemed to stand shoulder to Neo-Egyptian shoulder. In those darkened temples, people lived the vivid hours of their lives. The dreary residue endured outside passed like a trance. It is useless to ask which level of experience was the more real. Reality is only the dream in which our enemies believe. In modern times, our imaginations are enthralled by less poetic myths. We believe in statistics. Among other things, these tell us that movies are made for the girl between the ages of 15 and 20, preferably with an unhappy love life. This piece of information would not formerly have been much help. The movie industry operates in the realm of the affections, and there, until a few years ago, all women were 15. The term, a woman's film, is fairly new not because an opportunity to weep is a recently discovered pleasure, but because at one time there was no other kind of movie. Although stars were advertised as having SA, or IT, or oomph, it was never with the hope of luring men into the cinema. The portion of the male population that went to the pictures did so in order to sit with their girls in the back. The women went not for a reciprocal fumble, but to gather material for the dream of which these smash-and-grab raids on the part of their menfolk deprived them. Sex may have already come to real life, but comfortable sex was still a long way off. Proof of this lies in the look of the poorer districts of London at night. They are occupied, if at all, only by people on their way somewhere else. During the dreaming years, there was not a dark doorway between King's Cross and Paddington that did not partially conceal a couple that, for politeness' sake, we will describe as courting. Faintly bawdy songs about film stars were well known, but I never heard a man express any real desire for any of the divine women. The great female stars were worshipped by girls, because in their looks and the tone of their voices must lie the key to the pentagon of sex, that stronghold from which all men could be ruled and life, meaning sex, could be enjoyed on a woman's terms. The films of that era were truly immoral. They were governed by strict, almost ludicrously strict, rules about what areas of human skin could be exposed to the cameras, about how long a kiss on the lips should last, and about how much of a man's body must remain off the bed while he was attempting rape. The stories, where, after all, immorality must always reside, were subject to far less careful supervision. Almost every vehicle for a female star carried the same message: you can have your sexual cake and eat it. Since these films were shown to total believers at a time when, in fact, virginity before marriage was still all the rage, they were, to say the least, misleading. Thickly unmade up, the leading lady would say farewell to her good, kind parents, and set off for the wicked city. She had hardly taken her seat in the train before Mr. Lionel Atwell was asking, "What is a first-class girl like you doing in a third-class compartment?" From that moment onward it was down, down, down she went, while her dressmaker's bills rose higher and higher. After hours of degradation, her soul sick of sin, and her skeleton bowed by the sheer weight of fur and precious metal, she took refuge in the arms of any one of the industry's stuffies, Mr. Clive Brooke or Mr. Herbert Marshall. As each new star went through these rituals of fall and redemption, she was packaged by Mr. Louis B. Mayer and his merry men as holding the new improved stratagem for vanquishing men. Since the movies were not run by scientists, but by abominable snowmen, every discovery was put forward as the final answer. The posters were hardly dry on the billboards before a thunderous din like the soundtrack of Red River was heard throughout the island. It was caused by the hooves of thousands of women as they rushed upstairs to their bedrooms to throw out the aids to the now obsolete image and get to work with the new. In the late 20s, the streets of London were entirely overrun with near Garbos. In the early 30s, by failed Dietrichs. Before Miss Veronica Lake was finally drained, thousands of girls had been dragged by their hair into looms, through mangles, and under presses, as though they were living in a mechanized Aztec kingdom, merely because this particular actress wore her hair hanging over one eye. Wherever 2 or 3 women were gathered together, in factories and kitchens and laundries, from dawn till day's end, the conversation consisted of each of them acting out the entire story of the current release to all her workmates, with actions if there was room. Of course, the girls in the balcony seats never did learn the secret of style, because, in their haste, they neglected to do their homework. Between visits to movie palaces, they indulged in day-long fantasies, instead of submitting themselves to limited periods of grueling self-examination. It is a pity, for they stood at the entrance to the richest mine of style ever opened. What went wrong? Once again, life and art began that fatal movement toward each other. Whenever this occurs, it must not be blamed on the Philistines alone. It is often they who would like art to remain pure and free from the compromises of the world, and when they do wish for a convergence of art and life, it is usually because they want life to be more stylish. In the case of the movies, in their faltering way, the devotees tried to become as beautiful as their idols, and life has abetted them. Wealth, leisure, sex, and false eyelashes have gradually been brought within reach of all. This seems to me a good thing. What is bad is the movement from the other side. Artists never accept for long the limitations of their medium. They never seem aware that these are what gives their art its style. The decline of art is always from realism to naturalism. Realism is usually a technique of subtraction by which an artist lays bare the essence of his subject. Naturalism is always a trick of addition with which a charlatan seeks to give conviction to a lie. In the art of movie making, this disintegration was a particularly sad story, because in the beginning so much ground lay between it and real life, literally. Now pictures have lost even their national style and are made wherever money is available, but once they were almost all made in a desert on the other side of the world. In that paradise there were no buildings, only sets, no people, only actors. From the dawn of Miss Mary Pickford to the end of a perfect Miss Doris Day, not one sincere word was spoken. Even when sound came, it brought with it an unexpected fringe benefit. At first its use presented such technical difficulties that the whole industry moved indoors. Then not only the cast, but every stick and stone surrounding it was artificial. This happy state of affairs could not last. Talkies moved out into the streets, and even began to boast that they were doing so. At the same time, as with stage stars, movie actresses allowed it to be known that they were human. During the reign of Mr. Mayor, truth about players under contract to him came only from his lips. Not only their faces, but even their lives were made up. This kept their lifestyle all of a piece. Now, even if the human race still had a capacity for wonder, it could not lavish it upon film actresses. We know their real names, we know their real measurements, and when magazines like Confidential still flourished, we knew, or thought we knew, about their bizarre bedroom antics. It is true that even after it became known that Mr. Zeus was a sex maniac, he remained a god. But few people have a public relations department like his. The stars lost their glitter, and decadence set in. Audiences then began to take an interest in the movies themselves, not in the stories they told, but in the manner of telling them. Instead of rejoicing in the triumph of virtue, they got enthusiastic about accurate post-synchronization and skillful back projection. When the movies abandoned the star system, they did not lose everything, but gave up what was uniquely theirs. No other medium can so fully deploy physical style. No other art form is at once so intimate and so distant. The cinema allowed an audience to spy on its heroine as though from a nearby window with powerful binoculars. The subject appeared not to know she was being watched. She did not pause for laughs, nor raise her voice above the sound of coughing in the auditorium, as mere stage actresses do. She continued her private life undisturbed, thus giving us the exciting feeling that there was nothing, however personal, that she might not do. Yet we could scrutinize her so closely that we saw her skin texture and watched the beating of her heart. This combination of opposing qualities made every film into an overheard scandal, compared with which a play, performed with semaphore gestures and spoken with tub-thumper's diction, is as intimate as a parade ground command. We knew the stars as we know God. They were all-pervading, but remote. We created them, but their fate was not our fate, and they remained intractable, unlikely to respond to our prayers. Movies were not made in sequence. The whole purpose of this stratagem was to save money, to make full use of one set before striking it, but unintentionally it conferred on the final product an extra benefit. Actresses could survive this patchwork method of manufacture, could give their performances any degree of consistency only by perfecting a set of idiosyncrasies. The more predictable these gestures came to be, the more inevitable rightness in the character acquired. What audiences went to see was not an act of impersonation, but precisely the triumph of cast-iron personality over the hazards of life, desertion, betrayal, misunderstanding, and death. When the tide of popular taste turned, it was the indestructibility of the stars of the 20s and 30s, far more than their exaggerated makeup or their unfashionable clothes, that audiences laughed to scorn. Their mockery was misplaced. These films embodied an eternal truth, not merely on the screen, but in life itself. The only way in which we can survive and be seen to survive is by the dexterous use of a carefully selected and patiently rehearsed set of mannerisms. As long as the star system sold pictures, style was worth its glitter in gold. No one is born stylish, but some have style thrust upon them. Those actresses who began their careers with looks but no idiom were given one by their agents, their sponsors, or their directors. Sometimes the synthesized public image did not fit the woman on whom it had been imposed. In that case, she either rebelled, like Miss Davis, or acquiesced uneasily, like Miss Jean Harlow. The girls who accepted defeat on this issue suffered all the irritation that besets people with broken limbs in plaster casts. Stars compelled to wear ill-tailored lifestyles were not always able to shrug them off. They came to have the unpleasant feeling that they were receiving fan mail addressed to someone else of the same name. They seemed to have the world at their feet, but not in their hands. For this reason, in every envelope containing a long-term contract issued in Hollywood, there was also a small machine for cutting wrists. Suicide can either be a gesture of frustration made by the victim of an unsuitable lifestyle, or it may be the last graceful gesture of someone whose style has been completely mastered. I am sorry to say that Miss Marilyn Monroe's death seems to me to fall into the first category. She was not able to make full use of her fame, and thus became its victim. She did not become a stylist. Sometimes, If everything was just right, it was an advantage that an actress could be seen to be operating in a style that had been dictated to her. We are speaking of an age when, though people of the movie-going level of society had far less spare time, they were willing to take more trouble with their happiness. As long as a star's image was steady, it did not matter that it was cloudy. Indeed, this lured them forward to peer and to speculate. The object of their interest became someone whose behavior they could calculate, but whose motives could not be wholly understood. This imparted glamour, which is not mere beauty, exists wherever all is promised, but not all is given. The most perfect example of a star with this hypnotized and hypnotic quality was Miss Brigitte Helm. Perhaps inevitably, soon after the advent of the talkies, she became extinct. Though she would now be no more than 67 or 8, and was certainly the most beautiful woman that human eyes have seen, she is never photographed on the yachts of millionaires. She never appears in cabaret in Las Vegas. She does not write her memoirs, nor does she cause them to be written by Mr. John Bainbridge. At the National Film Theatre, where nothing is too archaic to be screened, the only film in which she starred that is ever shown is Metropolis. Even the critic Mr. Kevin Brownlow, who is besotted with the silent movies, hardly mentions her name, whereas one would have expected to find him rolling about on the carpet in front of one of her stills. It is possible, even likely, that before he left for the Islands of the Blessed, her director, Mr. Fritz Lang, dismantled her. He certainly assembled her in the first place. The program notes for Metropolis told the reader that Miss Helm was 18 when Mr. Lang chose her for the leading part, and that, during the entire time it took to make the film, she lived in his house with him and his wife so that the world might not touch her, and so that she could come under no other influence than his. It hardly matters whether this piece of information is true or merely a nice chunk of public relations hokum. To see the film is to feel that it is true. Its star has the quality of a walking, talking, living doll. This impression is reinforced by the fact that the story shows her being manufactured out of scrap aluminum by a wicked scientist. To this cold, mechanical style she forever after clung through thick makeup and thin plots. Though subsequently directed by other movie makers with slightly different styles, she continued to make very few concessions to real life. However mundane the events described in the scenarios, she lifted every film onto the love and death level, went shopping as though to the scaffold, and drank tea as though it were a love potion. Sad to say, even an audience riddled with culture would now have to watch one of her films with 2 pairs of eyes. It could not fail to admire her monumental beauty and the unequaled economy of gesture with which she performed every action. At the same time, it is impossible to deny that the whole thing is a ludicrously trumped-up charade, made worse by beehive hats and 6-yard trains hanging behind skirts that hardly cover the divine knees. Miss Helm's personal style was a peak rising above the great range of her national style. Germans evidently lean toward the cold, the cruel, the doomed. If they do not, and it was only the head of UFA Films who admired these qualities, then he must have held an entire nation in his iron grip, like a celluloid Hitler, for every picture that came out of Germany during the 20s was of this kind. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Warning Shadows, The Student of Prague. When, because the talkies raised a barrier of language between us and culture, we were compelled to turn our attention to entertainment, the change of atmosphere was like that which we feel when we come out of a cave on a sunny beach. Compared with the icy somnambulists of German films, Miss Garbo seems wide awake, almost human. She too had her private hypnotist, in Mr. Maurits Stiller, who took her to America, but the remoteness with which he invested her seemed to come not from having no heart, but, on the contrary, from being too sensitive to the tragic aspect of love. A critic has said of Miss Garbo that, in her pictures, she always seemed to be the only member of the cast who had read the script to the bitter end. She was the only one who knew that it would all turn out badly. One might go further and say that tragedy was her element. The trashy material of most of her films was brought to life only when the moment arrived for her to deliver one of her lectures on hopeless love. This appeared to be the one subject which, though it is unlikely that she ever experienced it, appealed strongly to this actress's imagination. The voice, which everyone in the world, except for one or two mean-spirited movie reviewers, had been waiting, turned out, in Garbo's talkies, to be permanently charged with emotion. It was made for the throaty crooning of captionees. I am so sorry for all the women that are not in love. Inspiration. To me, love is only a little warmth in all this cold romance. And of course, the greatest caption of all time. Perhaps it is better that I live only in your heart, where nothing can stain our love. How heart-rending that would have looked in Caslin old-face type, white on black, with the drawing of a camellia in the bottom right-hand corner. To realize fully the magnitude of this woman's lifestyle, we need only imagine how empty, indeed how embarrassing, these words would sound issuing from the lips of any other movie actress. Audiences left her films in a trance of numbed acceptance, wondering vaguely why the world, which to the rest of humanity seemed such a jolly place, was not good enough for her. I am warned that Sweden resents the opinion held by the rest of the world that suicide is its national style. It is a pity, for without it the country has no style at all. Nevertheless, to avoid causing the withdrawal of ambassadors, I will not put forward the suggestion that Miss Garbo's gloom was typically Swedish. We will consider her not geographically, but in relation to history. She came to California when the reign of Miss Gish appeared to be ended. Recent events have shown us that, in fact, this lady's reign never ends. She is a true exponent of lifestyle, and has converted the career in which she set out into the profession of being. Judged by the limited standard of Hollywood, however, her kingdom seemed to diminish. She represented sweetness and light, and from these two commodities the consumer appeal was passing rapidly. Someone had to be discovered who could win the love of several men in one film without, in real life, losing that of Mr. Mayer. Miss Garbo did this by fornicating liberally, but with massive distaste. The love behind her was always carnal and revolting, the love ahead divine. In Anna Christie, she played the part of a prostitute, and yet looked forward, if not with relish, at least with shakily founded hope, to being married to Mr. Charles Bickford. To modern moralists, the argument of this film would seem perverse. Mr. Bickford agreed to accept Miss Christie only after she swore that she had never loved any of her customers in St. Paul. Nowadays, this assertion would make disgusting a way of life that might otherwise be thought of as an interesting experience. Even so, Miss Garbo was the harbinger of the permissive society. Whatever happens to sex from now on, there will be no more divine women. Some clot left the greenhouse door open. But before this happened, there emerged from the middle of Berlin someone who was prepared to carry the flickering torch once more around the arena. Her name was Miss Marlene Dietrich. Thank you for listening so far.